Y'all, I knew men were gonna die in this scene. Hi, I'm Rena, and welcome back to my overly involved analysis of Epic the Musical by Jorge Rivera-Herrans. Today we're going to dig into the Cyclops Saga, where Odysseus faces off against his first monstrous foe and makes a number of, shall we say, pivotal choices. Thank you so much for the incredibly kind responses to my first video. I'm having a great time, and I hope you are too. If you haven't seen my Troy Saga video, you're more than welcome to stay, but we are going to be referring back to some of the things that we talked about there, so if you'd like, you could pop over and give that a watch and then come back. But otherwise, let's just jump straight into the Cyclops Saga. I have to confess, when I was making my notes about this saga, I was already thinking to myself, there's a lot more straightforward storytelling going on here. I don't know if I'm gonna have as much to say, but I was a fool, because as with any saga in epic, any song in epic, almost any line in epic, you take it at face value and then you think about it, and then all of a sudden you have red string on a corkboard like a maniac. Going in, this episode with the Cyclops is one of my favorite parts of the Odyssey. The scene with Polyphemus and Odysseus's nobody gambit is one of the most iconic parts of the original story, and also when I was in high school, we had to select parts of the text to memorize for recitation, and I chose a section from this episode. It's been well over a decade, and it is still just cemented into my brain. So I do have a particular affection for this part. I just feel like it's part of me. And from the beginning, I was excited to see how this was going to be portrayed in Epic, and of course, it did not disappoint. The day I first listened to Epic was a day I was driving around a lot, so I was just listening to the audio, I didn't have any visuals, and I was genuinely floored by how cinematic it was. The audio drama took me places. We have some great audio-based storytelling in the Troy Saga, with the fight scene in The Horse and the Infant, the ocean soundscape in Full Speed Ahead, the amazingly creepy and cute voices of the Lotus Eaters, but I really feel like we take it to this next level in Cyclops Saga. The audio alone does so much to set the scene and describe the action, from the sounds of the sheep, to the thwack of the arrow, to the echoey voices. We really feel like we're in this cave. And then Polyphemus comes in with this voice. Ooh, instant chills. Now, if the last saga was about presenting us with ruthlessness and mercy, this saga is our first test case. While we did encounter some magic with the Lotus Eaters in Troy Saga, the Cyclops Saga is where we really break into the new world. We meet our first monster and we get to test our mettle against him. We've already been set up to understand that there's a kind of power struggle happening between our protagonist's humanity and the immortal forces that they're up against. We're introduced to that idea in Full Speed Ahead and Open Arms, where the crisis is we have no food, a fundamental survival need, the most mortal of needs. And the first food we find is supernaturally unsafe. And we are, of course, reminded of that right at the top of Polyphemus with, look at all this food, there's enough here to feed the entire fleet. By having these human mortal needs lead us into the belly of the beast, more or less literally, depending on the telling of the story, we're starting to get an inkling of how unfit our mortals are for this world and how their humanity is going to work against them. And that's played out through the rest of the song Polyphemus. Polyphemus comes in with this line, "You killed my sheep, my favorite sheep. What gives you the right to deal a pain so deep?" That is a thought that never would have crossed these men's mind. They see the sheep as food. They never would have thought, oh, that could be someone's pet. So right away, we're on the back foot, realizing the rules have changed, and we can't trust what we know because that's no longer the standard by which we're being judged. But in the moment, Odysseus is like, this is going poorly, we have to get this situation under control, and he reaches for the best tool in his arsenal, his wits.
There's been a misunderstanding. We never came here to steal, but now that I see we've done some damage, maybe you and I can make a deal. I'll give you our finest treasure, so long as we leave alive. You can keep the world's best tasting wine.
So we hear this, and we're gonna be fine. Odysseus always has a plan. He's gonna talk this guy down, and if that doesn't work, we have a backup plan, the lotus in the wine. And on top of that, he's already 5 steps ahead, thinking about their escape, giving his name as nobody. And oh, if we don't get a bit of that infamous pride, just listen to him.
My name is Nobody, Nobody, Nobody.
The the way he sings Nobody, doesn't he just sound like a smug little rat? And then he breaks out, I'm so glad we see eye to eye. He's cracking jokes. He's feeling real confident. And all of this sets up this terrible moment of impact when Polyphemus comes in with his last line, you shall be the final man to die. That moment of realization is a physical blow. Our best weapon didn't cut it. And now we have to fight this guy for real, which takes us right into Survive.
My brothers, the rest of our fleet, they wait at the beach. And if we're defeated, their good is dead. Straight ahead, that is who we're fighting.
First of all, the assonance in this song, those rhythmic repeating vowel sounds, just scratch my brain so nicely. It's so punchy, and it gives this song real pace, like we're hurtling forward, which is very fitting for a song where we're charging into battle. And then we pull back a little bit for the chorus. 600 lives at stake, it's just one life to take. We're gonna come back to it's just one life to take, but for now, just a moment to relish the delicious dramatic irony of, and when we kill him, then our journey's over. In the next verse, the crew comes in to support Odysseus, and it's a pretty good mirror of this moment from The Horse and the Infant.
Find that inner strength now. Use that well of pride. Fight through every pain now. Ask yourself inside what you live for, what you try for, what you wish for, what you fight for. What do you live for? What do you try for? What do you wish for? What do you fight for?
And this is really excellent writing. The way that our expectations have been set, the way that early successes have instilled in us a certain amount of faith in Odysseus. In this scene in Survive, we see Odysseus's leadership. We see how he's able to rally his men in a perilous situation. We see the might of the crew. It's all things that we've seen before, and we've seen them succeed. And so we're made to feel like this fight is going well. And then we get that first sickening, heart-stopping crunch. I knew men were gonna die in this scene. I'm sure many of us came in kind of knowing how this goes, but the way I still gasped out loud. And all that pace I was talking about earlier, the way this song makes you feel like you're hurtling forward, this moment has enormous payoff because we come to a grinding halt. We get those deep, haunting cellos, we hear each horrifying blow, and Odysseus freezes. And it's such a brilliant character moment, because this is a guy who never expected to fail. We started this whole segment talking about the tension between our protagonist's humanity and the monstrous and magical forces that they're up against. And here Odysseus goes up against his first monster and ultimately finds himself wanting. He's not powerless. We still see how he is better equipped than the average man to handle these situations. In the end, it is his cleverness that saves them. His forethought to drug the wine eventually gives them the upper hand over Polyphemus, but it's not enough. And that's the key discovery of this saga. Your human mortal strengths are not going to be enough to get the job done, to get you and your crew safely home. Now hold that thought, it's super important for Ocean Saga, but in the moment, we are kind of forced to just sit with this dreadful realization while we finish up the work of extracting ourselves from this catastrophic situation in Remember Them. We start off with that fuzziness, Eurylochus's muffled voice calling out to Odysseus. We're given a moment to feel the shock, but then it's like Odysseus's brain switches back on and we are in pure problem-solving mode. We don't have time for feelings until we are out of danger. And then...
But Captain, what do we do with our fallen friends?
Remember them when the fire begins to fade. For the fallen and afraid, we are not to let them die in vain. Remember them, we're the ones who carry on the flames of those who've gone, and our comrades will not die in vain.
We get two big things here. The first is the impact of that first Remember Them. Eurylochus asks, what do we do with our fallen friends as a practical question? Proper burial is intensely important in ancient Greek texts, and failing to provide one is an insult to human dignity. The spirits of the dead are left to wander the earth, unable to make their passage into the afterlife. In fact, we in the Epic family are very familiar with the story of Elpenor. Poor Elpenor, the youngest of the crew, not very brave in war nor very smart, who gets drunk on Circe's island, falls off a roof, and breaks his neck. Famously, at least in the world of Epic, he dies and nobody notices. He dies and nobody cares. Odysseus doesn't even know he's dead until they go down to the underworld and Elpenor's spirit comes to find him on the banks of the river Acheron and begs Odysseus to return to Circe's island to bury his body. He says to Odysseus, I beg you, when you sail from Hades and you dock your ship again at Aea, please, my lord, remember me. Do not go on and leave me there unburied, abandoned, without tears or lamentation, humiliation, or you will make the gods enraged at you. Burn me with all my arms, and heap a mound beside the grey salt sea, so in the future people will know of me and my misfortune. And fix into the tomb the oar I used to row with my companions while I lived. And after leaving the underworld, they do return to Circe's island and give him a proper burial. That's how important this is. So this moment in Remember Them, saying we can't provide the proper burial rites for our dead, it's a real blow, and it comes at enormous personal cost. But what did Elpenor ask for? A memorial with the oar he used so that others may see it and remember his story. A huge part of ancient Greek burial practices involved memorials. The last offering given to the dead is continued remembrance by the living. So in this song, they may not be able to do right by their comrades, but at least they can give them this one piece of the rights that are due to them. Now consider how important this remembrance is, and add on everything else that Odysseus attaches to the remembrance. We're the ones who carry on, the flames of those who've gone, and our comrades will not die in vain. We've already been set up to understand Odysseus as a man who feels his guilt very intensely, who is haunted by it. And here he is saying, the only way we can do right by these men we've lost is by continuing to carry on. Our lives are essentially a memorial to them. This is his coping mechanism. And also remember that the only people present in the cave are the men from Odysseus's ship, which means these are the same men, the only men, who make it to the Isle of the Sun God in mutiny. And with all that in mind, consider how much more egregious the betrayal in mutiny seems from Odysseus's perspective. The core betrayal in mutiny is not Eurylochus fighting Odysseus, it's not Pyramedes stabbing him, it's not even really killing the cow. The cardinal sin, the one thing Odysseus cannot abide, is giving up. And there are a lot of factors that compound upon each other to get us to that moment in mutiny, and we'll talk about them as they come up. But this, in my opinion, is fundamental to understanding that moment. The other thing that's really critical about all of this guilt and grief that we see in Remember Them is that in order for the turn at the end of Act 1 to really hit, and more importantly, for the choice at the end of Thunder Saga to really hit, we have to understand what Odysseus's crew means to him. He's a man trying to get home to his wife, but he's also a commander trying to protect these men that he's responsible for. Both of those things have to be true in order for us to have an interesting story, because otherwise there's no cost. If Odysseus doesn't care about his crew deeply, if he doesn't allow his self-worth and his humanity to hinge on their survival, it doesn't mean anything when it all falls apart. But if we have a character who has two intensely important goals and we reach a point where they become mutually exclusive, that's a recipe for some very good storytelling. The agony, the heartbreak, the angst, and of course that's exactly where we're headed. But for now, we have the crew carrying out Odysseus' plan, blinding Polyphemus, and we get two very important little moments. The first is the crew singing this motif for the first time.
No! Scatter!
The thing is, I think there are a couple different interpretations of this motif that hold water, and how you interpret it will influence how you perceive a couple critical moments down the line. My personal read is that it signifies moments of unity between Odysseus and the crew, moments where the crew is carrying out Odysseus's plan, or where Odysseus is kind of acting as their champion, standing to represent them as a whole. But I also think there's a perfectly valid argument that it has nothing to do with Odysseus, and it really signifies the strength of the crew more than anything. We're gonna talk about it more, but we need to wait till we have a bigger sample size. The second important bit is Eurylochus.
There are more of them?
Who hurt you? Hide. Who hurt you?
Captain, we should run.
Wait. Who hurt you?
Captain, please!
We're introduced to Eurylochus in Full Speed Ahead as the guy who is most concerned with the practical needs of survival. He's the one who's like, Captain, we need more food. But Eurylochus's role in this show is not the practical one or the voice of reason. His role is to be the most human. He is, in that sense, totally driven by his survival instincts. Hunger, fight or flight, avoidance or mitigation of pain. He's totally unable to think past those instincts, and we start to see that picture come together here. The moment these additional Cyclopes show up, Eurylochus is like, we have to run right now, immediately. And we hear in his voice his pain and his fear. It is agony to this guy to sit still while this threat is looming right over his shoulder. Now, you don't have to be Athena to think one step ahead here. If you run and they see you, you're toast. But Eurylochus's pure instinct to get away from danger does not allow him to see past this most imminent threat. The sheer magnitude of his humanity is what makes him both so frustrating and also so completely understandable and sympathetic throughout the show. And it makes him into the perfect narrative foil for Odysseus, who kind of can hang with the immortals. We see Odysseus struggling in this scene, but we also see the ways in which he kind of can hold his own. Eurylochus and the crew, on the other hand, would have no hope without Odysseus. We've seen that demonstrated already. Even sweet Polites would not have made it past the Lotus Eaters without Odysseus realizing the danger of the food that they were given. At the same time, we see later on how Eurylochus's humanity affords him some power that Odysseus doesn't have access to. Eurylochus is the one anchoring the crew, and he has influence over them because he is so human. Now, what he does with that power is, a little questionable, but we're starting to excavate his character a little bit here. And now we get into the meat and potatoes. This is the hearty stuff.
Have you forgotten the lessons I taught you? He's still a threat until he's dead. Finish it.
No.
Athena comes back in with her fancy little piano riff, all, have you forgotten the lessons I taught you? She's popping up out of nowhere again, just like before, asserting her authority over Odysseus. And Odysseus, who just had his world rocked, who has just been made to feel powerless in the face of his supernatural foes, is having none of it. But how does he push back against Athena? With the same spoken no that we heard in Full Speed Ahead, which is genius. One word and we know exactly what kind of headspace Odysseus is in and where this resistance is coming from. We heard this no in Full Speed Ahead as a reaction to the thought of more violence, reflecting the guilt he's carrying from the end of Just a Man. So here, with this beautiful parallel, we know immediately that he's feeling that same weight of guilt, this time spurred on by the loss of his men and his best friend. And this is confirmed further in the next lines.
What good would killing do when mercy is a skill more of this world could learn to use? My friend is dead, our foe is blind, the blood we shed, it never dries. Is this what it means to be a warrior of the mind?
The blood we shed, it never dries. He's not saying I'm being merciful because of the kindness I have in my soul. He's saying I am haunted by the things I've done and the people I lost, and I don't want to be haunted by this too. We heard him say in Survive, 600 lives at stake, it's just one life to take. And the fact that he's justifying it to himself already tells us that he's not feeling very good about killing Polyphemus. But on top of that, this is coming right on the heels of the Troy Saga, where the infant was also just one life to take for the sake of the greater good. And we hear Odysseus tumbling down this slippery slope in his mind. If every subsequent instance is just one life to take, well, the blood we shed, it never dries. And then he finishes with, is this what it means to be a warrior of the mind? And I just need you to hold on to that because we're coming back to it. All of this buildup is so important because we're hurtling towards this iconic moment where Odysseus gives his name away. And we're about to make a pretty serious departure from the source material. When you're doing a retelling, you have to be super intentional about moments like this, because if you're not crystal clear about what you're trying to convey, anyone who's familiar with the source material is just going to autofill with whatever's in the original. This is especially true here because the moment is the same. The action that Odysseus takes is the same, but the motivation, the character behind the moment, has changed. So let's hear this. Even with all of guilt weighing him down, influencing his perspective, Odysseus maybe could have gotten away with letting Polyphemus live, if not for this.
Hey Cyclops! When we met, I led with peace, while you fed your inner beast. But my comrades will not die in vain, remember them. The next time that you dare, choose not to spare, remember them. Remember us, remember me. I'm the reigning king of Ithaca. I am neither man nor mythical. I am your darkest moment. I am the infamous Odysseus!
In the Odyssey, this is the principal moment of hubris, because this moment is driven by Odysseus's need for notoriety, for glory. He needs the Cyclops to know that it was Odysseus of Ithaca who bested him, for Odysseus's own sake. He was willing to do it for the bit, but ultimately the idea of being nobody is anathema to that version of Odysseus. That's not what we get here. We have an Odysseus who is already torn apart by the guilt he carries and who just suffered another major loss. And that's what drives him to turn around and say, hey you. And there are layers here. He starts with, when we met, I led with peace, while you fed your inner beast, which we all know is not totally true. Odysseus killed his buddy first, and he was already dosing Polyphemus with the lotus before Polyphemus rejected his deal. But what's important here is the self-righteousness. After he's endured terrible losses, this is the only thing Odysseus has to hold on to. The belief that he behaved rightly and Polyphemus behaved wrongly. All of this guilt he's feeling is filling him up like a pressure chamber, and this moment is allowing him to just crack the release valve on it a little bit and release some of that pain by laying the blame at Polyphemus's feet. Now, whether you and I in the audience believe he acted rightly doesn't matter. What matters is that he believes he did. In this moment, Odysseus has a certainty that he was in the right, that he has the moral high ground by allowing Polyphemus to live, which is what makes him feel empowered to turn around and say, those men you killed, they're gonna haunt you. And me, I'm your darkest moment. You will never recover from the wrong you did to me. And it's important because that's what you lose when you choose the monster. When you choose to sacrifice the moral high ground and you still lose lives, you will always have that question in the back of your head. Did I do the right thing? Did I choose the right path? And I love the choice of diction at the end here. I am the infamous Odysseus. It's like he wants Polyphemus to spit his name. For all that he may believe he's in the right, he is also okay with being the villain in your story. And that does actually jive very well with the source material, where Odysseus often feels like an unreliable narrator because of all the ways he justifies some of the horrible acts of violence he commits. And that's true in the Cyclops Saga, maybe more than anywhere else in the book. And then of course, we end Cyclops Saga with My Goodbye, which is one of my favorite songs in the musical. The grit, the emotion, the way that Athena and Odysseus do not pull their punches. And I mean, who among us did not lose their minds at that Just a Man callback? Athena comes out swinging, and we're immediately reminded of this tension between humanity and godliness with her disdain for Odysseus's emotions and her super callous mention of his dead friends. Then she says, you're a warrior meant to lead the rest. Remember how I told you to hold on to that line from Remember Them? Is this what it means to be a warrior of the mind? Odysseus and Athena have been working together for decades, but they are not on the same page about their priorities, and we've been getting hints about that this whole time. Let's go back to Warrior of the Mind for a moment. Athena states flat out, my life has one mission, create the greatest warrior. But even back then, we'd already been told by present-day Odysseus, I'd trade the world to see my son and wife. If you have two people who are that absolute about their goals, it is inevitable that they're gonna reach a point where they have to split because compromise is not on the table. They might be able to work together for a period of time while their goals are complementary, but eventually they're going to want fundamentally different things. And this is actually a pretty cool parallel to the original text. Athena never abandons Odysseus the way that she does in Epic, but we definitely see moments where her goals do not line up with Odysseus's, and because she's a goddess, she's able to steer him away from his desires to suit her own purposes. Our good friend Emily Wilson describes it like this. Athena's ultimate motives are mixed and not always benevolent, as befits a divine being in the Greek imagination. She presents herself as consistently the defender of Odysseus and his male line. However, we are also reminded in Book 5 that the storms which scattered the Greek fleet after the sack of Troy were caused by Athena herself, working alongside Poseidon, since she was enraged at how the Greeks defiled the Trojan temples, and she wanted to increase the glory of her favorite when, after long delays, he finally returns to slaughter the suitors. All of this to say, this break had to come. And then we get one of my favorite lines in this song. Athena says, I don't know where I went wrong. Remember all that chatter about agency in the Troy Saga? We're back. It is stark, the way that she doesn't even bother blaming him. She takes his actions as a reflection of her own capabilities because he is a product of her craftsmanship. She doesn't see him as his own person. She sees him as a vessel for her will and a reflection of her glory, which is so unhinged and also exactly the right tone for a goddess to have. And then she finishes, I warned you and you failed the test, so now I'm gone. And we learn that even the gods who are supposed to be your friends, your allies, You can't count on them. Look how fast your fortunes can change in this new world. And when Odysseus comes in with his verse, he's not pulling punches either.
It's just like you, why should I be surprised? Selfish and prideful and vain, unlike you. Every time someone dies, I'm left to deal with the strain. What's a title that a goddess could lend? If I'll never sleep at night, I'll remind you I saw you as a friend, but now we're done.
That's just like you. Why should I be surprised? Selfish and prideful and vain. I love this because I think at first it's a little bit jarring. You're like, dude, she's a goddess. You're gonna get smoked. But then the fact that he can talk to her like this really drives home the point that these are two people who have had a very close relationship for a very long time. They know each other, and so they know how to hurt each other. And I cannot sing along with Odysseus's verse without a full dramatic performance, because you hear the pain in his voice, you feel it. Unlike you, every time someone dies, I'm left to deal with the strain. We get the guilt bubbling back to the surface with, what's a title that a goddess could lend if I'll never sleep at night? And then his chorus is all about reclaiming that control, reclaiming his agency. You're out of my head now, you can't plague my life. When all is done, you're out of sight and out of mind. And he goes on to say, yeah, you can have what you want, you can have your damn goodbye, because I'll get my life back. I don't have to be your image of the greatest warrior. The timing of this is critical. Athena has presented him with this opportunity to feel like he's in control again, right after he just faced this horrible loss where he felt a little bit powerless. Of course that seems tempting to him in this moment, but naturally it comes with a cost. You can have the possibility of divine assistance along with the possibility of divine interference, or you can have the reliability of being in control with none of the divine assistance. At least not from a known quantity like Athena. You're gonna have to take your chances with perhaps some more mercurial entities. Everything from there on, starting from you're not looking for a mentor, I'm not looking for a friend. I mean, tell me you don't feel that in your chest. It's so good. One of the things I really love about this saga as a whole is that we have a couple places where Jorge made changes to the original story for the sake of heightened interpersonal conflict. We have Polites' death, which in the Odyssey does not happen until the island of the sun god, and besides which, because he isn't as important of a character, doesn't mean as much. And we have Athena's abandonment, which is entirely new to this telling of the story. Both of these losses are devastating and in completely different ways. This saga is an emotional hurricane, from the adrenaline-fueled highs of the fight scenes to the crushing lows of the losses. And because we see throughout the story how these emotions and experiences influence our characters' decisions and the actions they take, we end up with a really strong character-driven narrative instead of a plot that sort of plods along with things happening to the characters, and the characters relegated to a more passive, reactionary role. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate how difficult it can be when you're adapting from an existing story to pick your moments to be like, what can I add or what can I change to really raise the stakes, heighten the conflict, draw the audience in even more than whatever was offered in the original telling of the story. But as always with Jorge, even the changes that he makes come with some cool connections to the source material. In Greek mythology, Athena's domain is associated with civilized, urban, and domestic spaces. So it makes sense that we're losing our connection with her just as we're crossing this critical threshold in the Cyclops Saga. Losing our connection with Athena is indicative of the fact that we're stepping outside of the world of humans, where order and strategy govern the rules of engagement, and into this untamed, unpredictable, treacherous landscape. And this is thrown into sharp relief because whose domain do we step into? Poseidon, god of the sea, Earthshaker, a much wilder, much more capricious force of nature, making his presence known from the first moment of Ocean Saga. And that's where we're headed next. And at last, that is all I have for you today. Once again, I would love to hear your thoughts as well, whether you agree or disagree or read any of this just completely differently than I did. And if you liked this, maybe consider hitting subscribe. We're gonna be talking about the Ocean Saga next. Can't speak English. Why is my voice feeling like it's giving out on me?